In the autumn of 1900, deep in the Ozark Mountains, something terrible stirred in the Holloway Hotel. This is the macabre story of what transpired in that forgotten establishment, a horror so profound that history itself chose to bury it. To ground what follows, the setting matters. The Holloway Hotel sat nestled in a remote valley, accessible only by a winding mountain path that few dared to traverse after dark. Built in 1853 by industrialist James Holloway, it was intended to be a luxurious retreat for wealthy travelers seeking the natural beauty of the Arkansas wilderness. Yet by 1900, the hotel had become a place of whispers, a destination where guests arrived but never seemed to leave. Local folklore spoke of strange lights flickering in the windows during stormy nights, of phantom sounds echoing from the building when it should have been empty. The nearest town, Mountain View, lay 20 miles away through treacherous terrain, making the hotel an isolated beacon in a sea of dense forest. The Ozark Mountains, with their ancient caves and hidden hollows, had always been a place where strange things occurred, where the veil between the living and the dead seemed unusually thin. The hotel's staff had dwindled over the years from a robust team of 15 to merely 3 souls who maintained the establishment with an almost fanatical dedication. The manager, Cornelius Blackwood, was a gaunt man in his 60s with eyes that seemed to hold secrets he dare not speak. His assistant, Matilda Crane, was a woman of 40 with graying hair and nervous tics that suggested she knew more than she let on. The groundskeeper, Silas Webb, was a mute man of indeterminate age who communicated through grunts and gestures, his face permanently etched with lines of worry. In the summer of 1900, the hotel received its most unusual guest yet. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, a physician from St. Louis, arrived with his young assistant, Miss Dorothy Chen, seeking to document the medicinal properties of local Ozark plants. Hartwell was a man of science, skeptical of local superstitions, yet even he would find his rational worldview challenged by what he discovered in the Holloway Hotel. The hook is stark. Dr. Hartwell's journal entries from that period describe a place where the laws of nature seemed suspended, where guests who had registered checked out as different people entirely. Listen closely. What happened in the Holloway Hotel during that autumn would defy explanation and challenge everything we believe about the boundary between life and death. If careful, source-grounded dark history is your thing. Please like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. As Dr. Hartwell settled into his room on the 3rd floor, overlooking the deep well that served as the hotel's primary water source, he noted in his journal the peculiar silence that enveloped the building. It was not the peaceful quiet of the countryside, but a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. The well, he observed, was unusually deep and dark, its surface never catching the light, no matter where he stood to observe it. The hotel's architecture itself was unsettling. Built in a modified Victorian style, it featured long corridors with high ceilings that created an echoing chamber for any sound. The walls were lined with portraits of previous guests, their eyes seeming to follow visitors as they passed. The furniture, though elegant, bore the patina of age and neglect, as if the building existed in a perpetual state of decay despite the staff's maintenance efforts. That first evening, Dr. Hartwell attended the communal dinner where he met the other guests. There were only 4 others, an elderly couple, the Whitmores, who spoke in hushed tones about their long stay at the hotel, a young woman named Sarah, who claimed to be researching local history but seemed unable to remember how long she had been there, and a man who introduced himself as Thomas, though he never mentioned his surname, and spoke of events as if they had occurred decades ago when they were clearly recent news. As the evening progressed, Dr. Hartwell began to notice peculiarities that challenged his scientific understanding. The guests seemed to exist in different temporal states, with some referring to events as if they had happened recently, while others spoke of the same events as distant memories. The food served was always the same, a hearty stew that tasted different to each diner, somehow tailored to their individual preferences despite being ladled from the same pot. Miss Chen, Dr. Hartwell's assistant, was particularly disturbed by the atmosphere. She confided in him that she felt as though she were being watched constantly, and that the other guests sometimes seemed to fade in and out of focus when she wasn't looking directly at them. These observations would prove crucial to understanding the true nature of the horror that awaited them in the depths of the Holloway Hotel. The first night brought with it dreams that felt more real than waking life. Dr. Hartwell found himself standing at the edge of the deep well, looking down into its impossibly dark depths. In his dream, he could hear voices calling from below, not cries for help, but invitations to descend. The voices belonged to people he had never met, but somehow recognized, as if they were old friends calling his name. On the second day of Dr. Hartwell's stay at the Holloway Hotel, the true nature of the establishment began to reveal itself through a series of increasingly disturbing observations. The morning started with Miss Chen discovering that her research notes from the previous evening had been altered overnight, with entries in her own handwriting describing events she had no memory of witnessing. The ink was fresh, yet the writing appeared to be weeks old, as if time itself had been compressed into a single night. Dr. Hartwell noticed that the other guests seemed to have changed overnight. The Whitmores, who had appeared elderly the previous evening, now seemed to be in their 30s, yet they spoke of events from decades past as if they had occurred recently. Sarah, the young woman researching local history, had somehow aged considerably, her hair now streaked with gray, though she insisted it was still the same day she had arrived. Thomas, the mysterious guest with no surname, had multiplied. Dr. Hartwell now counted 3 men identical to Thomas sitting at different tables during breakfast, each one claiming to be the original. The hotel's corridors seemed to have expanded overnight. Hartwell had walked the same route from his room to the dining hall, yet found himself passing through sections of hallway that had not existed the previous day. Portraits lined these new sections, depicting guests who bore an uncanny resemblance to the current occupants of the hotel, though the paintings appeared to be decades old. The names on the portrait plaques were familiar: Whitmore, Chen, Hartwell, as if the hotel had been expecting them for years. Matilda Crane, the assistant manager, seemed increasingly agitated as the day progressed. When Dr. Hartwell approached her with questions about the strange occurrences, she would only respond with cryptic warnings. "The well remembers everything, and some guests never leave, doctor. They simply change." Her nervous tics had worsened, and she constantly checked her watch as if counting down to some predetermined moment. The groundskeeper, Silas Webb, was nowhere to be seen on the second day, though Dr. Hartwell could hear the sound of digging coming from the direction of the well. The rhythmic thud of a shovel against earth continued throughout the day and well into the night, growing closer to the hotel with each passing hour. When Dr. Hartwell attempted to investigate, he found that the path to the well had been blocked by an impenetrable thicket that had not been there that morning. Miss Chen made a disturbing discovery in the hotel's library that afternoon. Among the collection of books, she found volumes that chronicled the history of the Holloway Hotel, but each book contained different versions of the same events. In one account, the hotel had been built in 1853 as a sanitarium for treating tuberculosis patients. In another, it was constructed in 1861 as a way station for travelers during the Civil War. A third book claimed it was an old plantation house that had been converted to a hotel after the war. All accounts agreed on one detail: guests who drank from the well never left. The truth was far darker than Dr. Hartwell had initially realized. As he examined the guest register that evening, he discovered that his own name had been entered decades before, in 1873, with an arrival date but no departure. The same was true for all the current guests. Their names appeared in the register multiple times, across different decades, with the same arrival date but no record of leaving. It seemed that time itself had become fluid within the confines of the Holloway Hotel. That night, Dr. Hartwell was awakened by the sound of singing coming from the well. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, yet filled with an inexplicable sadness. As he pressed his ear to the window overlooking the well, he could make out shapes moving in the water far below, figures that seemed to be waving at him from the depths. The faces were familiar, though he could not place them. They looked like people from his past, people he had lost, people he had never met but somehow knew intimately. Miss Chen reported similar experiences, though her visions were more vivid. She claimed to see her entire life playing out in the well's depths, not the life she was living, but alternate versions of her existence, as if the well contained all possible timelines. In one vision, she was a guest at the Holloway Hotel in 1895. In another, she was the hotel's cook in 1910. In a third, she was Matilda Crane, the assistant manager, watching new guests arrive with the same expression of confusion and fear that now marked her own face. The hotel's architecture continued to shift throughout the night. Walls moved, doors appeared where none had existed before, and familiar rooms became unrecognizable. Dr. Hartwell found himself in a section of the hotel he had never seen, filled with rooms that contained the personal belongings of previous guests. Each room was perfectly preserved, as if the occupants had simply stepped out for a moment and would return at any time. In one room he found his own medical bag, though he had never left it anywhere in the hotel. The bag contained instruments he recognized but had never owned, prescriptions he had never written, and patient notes describing treatments he had never performed. The morning of the third day brought with it a new realization. Dr. Hartwell and Miss Chen were no longer sure how long they had been at the hotel. Their memories of arriving seemed both recent and ancient, as if they had been guests for days and decades simultaneously. The other guests now treated them as if they had always been part of the hotel's permanent population, speaking to them as old acquaintances who had simply forgotten their own history. By the third day, Dr. Hartwell's scientific skepticism had been thoroughly shattered by the impossible events occurring around him. The hotel had become a labyrinth of temporal anomalies, where past and present merged into an incomprehensible tapestry of existence. What nobody knew was that the Holloway Hotel was not merely an accommodation for travelers, but a nexus point where the veil between life and death had been permanently torn. The well at the center of the hotel's property was not just a source of water, but a conduit to another realm entirely. As Dr. Hartwell delved deeper into the hotel's archives, he discovered that James Holloway, the hotel's original owner, had been a practitioner of occult sciences. In 1852, Holloway had commissioned the digging of the well specifically to tap into what he called the River of Souls, an underground spring that flowed with the essence of the departed. The hotel was built around this well, not by coincidence, but by design, intended to serve as a conduit for supernatural forces. Dr. Hartwell found Holloway's personal journals hidden behind a false wall in the basement. The entries detailed how the well had begun to drink the life force of guests who consumed its water, trapping their souls in a perpetual state between life and death. Holloway wrote of his growing realization that he had created a prison for human consciousness, where souls existed in a state of suspended animation, neither truly alive nor dead. The hotel staff, Blackwood, Crane, and Webb, were revealed to be Holloway's original employees, kept alive for decades by the well's dark influence, serving as custodians of this realm of trapped souls. Miss Chen's condition had deteriorated significantly by the third day. She reported that she could see the true forms of the other guests, translucent figures overlaying their current appearances, showing them as they had looked in different time periods. She described seeing Sarah as a young bride in the 1860s, as a middle-aged woman in the 1880s, and as an elderly matron in the 1920s, all simultaneously. The hotel was not just affecting the guests' perception of time, it was literally overlapping multiple timelines within the same space. The Whitmores, who had been at the hotel longer than anyone else, approached Dr. Hartwell with a desperate warning. They explained that they had arrived in 1871, not as the elderly couple he had initially perceived, but as newlyweds on their honeymoon. Over the decades, they had witnessed countless guests arrive and become trapped, their souls gradually absorbed into the well's dark waters. They had learned to adapt to the hotel's temporal shifts, changing their appearance and memories to match whatever time period they found themselves in, but they were slowly losing their sense of individual identity. Thomas, in his various manifestations, revealed that he was actually several different men who had all arrived at the hotel over the years. Each Thomas represented a different guest who had been partially absorbed by the well, their consciousness fragmented and scattered across multiple temporal states. They spoke in unison at times, their voices overlapping in a chorus of confusion and despair, describing the sensation of existing in multiple decades simultaneously while slowly losing their grip on their original identity. The hotel's basement held the most disturbing revelation. Dr. Hartwell discovered a hidden chamber beneath the well, accessible only when the moon reached a specific position in the sky. Inside, he found hundreds of personal items belonging to guests who had vanished from the historical record: jewelry, clothing, documents, and photographs. Each item was perfectly preserved, as if the owners had simply stepped out of reality and left their possessions behind. The walls were covered with names carved in stone, a memorial to the lost souls who had become part of the well's dark collection. That evening, the hotel's true purpose became horrifyingly clear. As the sun set, the well began to emit a soft, ethereal glow, and the trapped souls of previous guests materialized in the hotel's corridors. They moved through the halls like a spectral parade, their forms flickering between different time periods, showing their various incarnations during their extended stays at the Holloway Hotel. Some appeared as they had during their first visit, others as they had become after years of temporal displacement, and still others as they would appear decades in the future if they were ever able to leave. Dr. Hartwell realized that the well was not just trapping souls, it was harvesting them, using their life force to maintain the hotel's supernatural properties and to extend the lives of its permanent staff. The more souls it consumed, the stronger its influence became, allowing it to reach further back and forward in time to ensnare new victims. The hotel was a living entity, sustained by the suffering and confusion of its guests, growing more powerful with each soul it claimed. Miss Chen discovered that her own reflection had begun to change. In some mirrors she appeared as herself, but in others she saw herself as various historical figures: a nurse during the Civil War, a suffragette in the early 1900s, a factory worker during the Great Depression. The well was beginning to fragment her identity, preparing her to join the ranks of the temporally displaced. She was becoming part of the hotel's collection, her soul being gradually absorbed into its ever-expanding network of trapped consciousness. The middle of the story is approaching a critical point where the protagonists must confront the true horror of their situation. If this careful middle chapter is earning your trust, please tap like and subscribe. Small actions that let us keep telling long stories the patient way. Dr. Hartwell and Miss Chen were running out of time, as the well's influence grew stronger with each passing hour, and they had yet to discover a way to escape the temporal prison that surrounded them. On the fourth day, Dr. Hartwell made a horrifying discovery that changed everything he thought he understood about the Holloway Hotel. While examining the guest register with fresh eyes, he realized that his own name appeared not just in 1873 as he had previously seen, but in multiple entries across different decades. In 1881, he was listed as a guest who had arrived seeking treatment for consumption. In 1892, he appeared as a Civil War veteran seeking respite from his wartime trauma. In 1910, he was recorded as a traveling salesman who had come to investigate strange reports about the area. Each entry was in his own handwriting, yet he had no memory of making any of them. The revelation that he had apparently visited the hotel multiple times across different time periods sent chills down his spine. It suggested that the well's influence was not just trapping souls temporarily, but was somehow pulling them back through time to repeat their stay in different incarnations. Dr. Hartwell began to suspect that he was not experiencing his first visit to the Holloway Hotel, but rather another iteration of countless previous visits, each one blurring into the next as his consciousness was repeatedly absorbed and then partially released by the well's dark influence. Miss Chen had become increasingly detached from reality as the fourth day progressed. Her temporal displacement had accelerated to the point where she would sometimes speak in languages she had never learned, describing historical events she could not possibly have witnessed. She claimed to remember being a guest at the hotel during the Civil War, when it served as a field hospital for wounded soldiers. In this memory, she had been a nurse named Dorothy, who had come to the Ozark Mountains to escape the horrors of war, only to find new horrors waiting for her at the Holloway Hotel. The hotel staff, particularly Matilda Crane, had become more openly hostile toward Dr. Hartwell and Miss Chen as their attempts to uncover the truth intensified. Crane warned them that the well does not suffer investigators, and that previous guests who had tried to leave or expose the hotel's secrets had simply become part of the establishment's permanent collection. She showed them a section of the basement that was off-limits to guests, where portraits of former investigators and journalists lined the walls. All of them had come to the Ozarks to uncover the truth about the Holloway Hotel, and all of them had become trapped by its supernatural influence. Dr. Hartwell found evidence that the hotel's well was connected to a vast underground network of caves and tunnels that extended deep into the Ozark Mountains. Using a rope and lantern, he descended into the well's depths during the darkest hour of night, when the supernatural barriers were at their weakest. What he found in those subterranean passages defied explanation: an underground lake that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness, its surface reflecting not the lantern's light, but images of the hotel's guests across different time periods. In the depths of the underground lake, Dr. Hartwell discovered a massive collection of souls suspended in the dark water. They appeared as translucent figures, some reaching toward the surface as if trying to escape, others resigned to their fate and floating peacefully in the depths. The most disturbing sight was that of the hotel's original owner, James Holloway, who had not died as historical records claimed, but had instead merged with the well itself, becoming a permanent part of its dark consciousness. Holloway's form was vast and amorphous, a being of pure malevolence that fed on the life force of trapped souls. Miss Chen's condition worsened dramatically when she accompanied Dr. Hartwell on a second expedition into the well's depths. The underground lake seemed to recognize her as a returning soul, and the trapped consciousness of her previous incarnations began to call out to her. She heard the voices of every Dorothy who had ever stayed at the Holloway Hotel, each one begging her to join them in the depths. The voices were so compelling that she nearly stepped into the water, only to be pulled back by Dr. Hartwell at the last moment. The Whitmores, in their various temporal states, revealed that they had discovered a way to resist the well's influence, but only temporarily. They had learned to anchor themselves to specific time periods by creating physical reminders of their original identities, wedding rings, photographs, personal letters, which helped maintain their connection to their true selves. However, these anchors were slowly losing their power, and the Whitmores estimated that they had perhaps days before they too would be completely absorbed into the well's collection. Thomas, in his fragmented state, had become a living repository of the hotel's history. When his various incarnations spoke together, they could recite the names of every guest who had ever stayed at the Holloway Hotel, along with the circumstances of their arrival and the point at which they had become trapped. According to Thomas's collective memory, over 400 souls had been absorbed by the well since its creation in 1853, each one adding to its growing power and influence. Dr. Hartwell realized that the hotel was not just a trap for individual souls, but a deliberate attempt to create a parallel dimension where time flowed differently, where the dead could coexist with the living, and where James Holloway could rule over an eternal kingdom of trapped consciousness. The hotel served as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the well, allowing Holloway to extend his influence beyond death and to continue gathering souls for his dark empire. The fourth night brought with it the most terrifying revelation yet. Dr. Hartwell awoke to find the hotel's corridors filled with an endless procession of guests from different time periods, all moving in perfect synchronization toward the well. They walked with empty eyes and blank expressions, their bodies under the direct control of the well's consciousness. Miss Chen was among them, her temporal displacement having progressed to the point where she was no longer in control of her own actions. Dr. Hartwell realized that he was witnessing the final stage of the absorption process, where trapped souls became extensions of the well's will, serving to lure new victims to their doom. As dawn broke on the fifth day, Dr. Hartwell found himself alone in his room, the procession of possessed guests having vanished with the first light. Miss Chen was nowhere to be found, and the hotel felt eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath before the next phase of its dark plan unfolded. The absence of the other guests, the Whitmores, Sarah, and the various Thomas incarnations, suggested that they too had been absorbed into the well's collective consciousness, becoming part of the supernatural machinery that lured new victims to their doom. Dr. Hartwell's investigation of the hotel during this brief respite revealed that the building itself was changing. Walls that had been solid stone now felt permeable, as if he could step through them into different time periods. The portraits of previous guests had multiplied, with new faces appearing in empty frames, as if the hotel were creating memories of guests who had never existed. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Hartwell found his own face appearing in several of these portraits, depicting him at different ages and in different clothing, suggesting various incarnations of his stay at the Holloway Hotel across multiple decades. In the basement archives, Hartwell discovered James Holloway's final journal entries, written in a hand that had become increasingly erratic and desperate. Holloway had realized too late that his creation had grown beyond his control. The well had begun to expand its influence beyond the hotel itself, reaching out to affect the surrounding Ozark Mountains and drawing in travelers from ever greater distances. Holloway's attempts to close the well had failed, and he had been forced to merge with it to prevent it from breaking free entirely and consuming the entire region. According to Holloway's final entries, the well required a specific ritual to maintain its connection to the world of the living. Every 50 years, it needed to absorb a keeper, a person of strong will and scientific mind who could help organize and manage the growing collection of souls. Dr. Hartwell realized with horror that he was the designated keeper for the 1900 cycle, chosen specifically because his rational mind would help maintain the hotel's complex temporal structure while his soul was slowly absorbed into the collective. The hotel began to manifest more aggressive supernatural phenomena as the day progressed. Doors locked of their own accord, trapping Dr. Hartwell in various rooms where he would find evidence of Miss Chen's presence, her journal pages describing her experiences in different time periods, photographs of her with people she had never met, and letters addressed to her from her various incarnations. Each piece of evidence suggested that she had been at the hotel for decades, not days, and that her current visit was simply the latest iteration of a cycle that had been repeating for over a century. Dr. Hartwell discovered that the hotel's basement extended far deeper than he had initially realized, with levels that seemed to exist in different time periods simultaneously. In one section, He found period-appropriate medical equipment from the 1800s, with patient records describing treatments for temporal displacement and soul fragmentation. In another, he discovered more modern equipment that looked as though it had been installed recently, though it operated using principles that defied contemporary scientific understanding. The truth was far darker than Dr. Hartwell had imagined. The Holloway Hotel was not just trapping souls from the present time, but was actively reaching backward and forward through history to collect individuals who would serve specific functions within its supernatural ecosystem. Miss Chen had been chosen not just as a guest but as a temporal anchor, someone whose consciousness could exist across multiple time periods simultaneously, helping to maintain the hotel's connection to different eras. Her increasing temporal displacement was not a side effect of her stay, but the very purpose of her presence at the hotel. As evening approached, Dr. Hartwell found Miss Chen in the hotel's main parlor, but she was not alone. Surrounding her were dozens of figures from different time periods, all apparently under the well's control. She sat in the center of this spectral gathering, her eyes now completely white, speaking in multiple voices that belonged to every Dorothy who had ever been at the hotel. She described the beauty of existing in all time periods simultaneously, the peace of having no single identity to maintain, the joy of being part of something greater than individual existence. Hartwell realized that the well's influence had grown strong enough to begin affecting the outside world. Through the hotel's windows, he could see that the surrounding forest had changed. The trees appeared to be from different time periods, with some showing the effects of decades of growth while others looked newly planted. The sky above the Ozark Mountains showed multiple suns and moons, suggesting that the well's temporal distortions were beginning to affect reality on a larger scale. In the hotel's library, Dr. Hartwell found a book that had not existed before, written in his own handwriting but containing knowledge he did not possess. The book detailed the complete history of the Holloway Hotel, including events that had not yet occurred. It described how the well would eventually break free of its underground confines and spread its influence across the entire continent, creating a world where time flowed differently and the living and dead coexisted in a state of eternal confusion. The book was titled The Complete History of the Holloway Hotel, from 1853 to Eternity, and it bore his name as author. The climax of Dr. Hartwell's ordeal began that night as the well's power reached its peak. The hotel's structure began to phase in and out of reality, existing partially in the present time and partially in a realm of pure temporal chaos. Dr. Hartwell understood that he had to make a choice, submit to the well's influence and become its next keeper, helping to maintain the system that traps souls across time, or find a way to destroy the connection between the hotel and the well before it became too powerful to stop. Miss Chen, still in the parlor surrounded by the temporal collective, began to call out to him directly, using intimate details from his life that he had never shared with her. She spoke of his childhood in St. Louis, of his decision to become a physician after his sister's death, of his secret fears and hopes. The well had absorbed not just her consciousness, but all of her knowledge of him, making her a perfect instrument for his psychological manipulation. The sixth day marked the climax of Dr. Hartwell's ordeal at the Holloway Hotel, as the well's power reached its zenith and the true scope of its influence became horrifyingly clear. The hotel had become a focal point where multiple timelines converged, and Dr. Hartwell found himself experiencing memories that were not his own, moments from his life as it had occurred in different time periods, with different choices and different outcomes. He remembered being a guest at the hotel in 1873, in 1881, in 1892, each visit feeling as real and significant as his current experience. Miss Chen, now completely subsumed by the well's collective consciousness, had become a living conduit between the temporal dimensions. Her body remained in the main parlor, but her presence extended throughout the hotel and beyond, touching every trapped soul and drawing them deeper into the well's influence. She spoke with the voices of all the Dorothys who had ever stayed at the Holloway Hotel, describing the blessing of temporal unity and the gift of existing beyond the constraints of linear time. Her words carried an almost irresistible appeal, promising an end to the loneliness and isolation of individual existence. Dr. Hartwell discovered that the well was not merely absorbing souls, but was using them as components in a vast supernatural machine designed to rewrite history itself. Each trapped consciousness contributed to a collective effort to alter past events, creating a feedback loop where the hotel's influence extended further back in time with each absorbed soul. The well was attempting to ensure its own creation by manipulating the circumstances that led James Holloway to dig it in the first place, creating a temporal paradox that would make the hotel's existence inevitable across all possible timelines. The hours before the end produced claims we will not catalog in lurid detail. Hartwell's own notes speak of escalating anomalies within and just beyond the hotel, voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and a logic that bent toward making the place inevitable. Whether these experiences describe metaphysics or a mind under siege, the only part we can usefully carry forward is the turn that followed. He stopped cooperating with the narratives pressed upon him and held fast to observed reality. As the hotel began to phase completely out of normal space-time, Dr. Hartwell made his final attempt to break the well's hold. He realized that the only way to stop the temporal manipulation was to refuse to accept the false memories and alternate timelines that the well was projecting into his consciousness. He focused on the reality of his original purpose, to document medicinal plants, and used his scientific training to recognize the supernatural phenomena for what they were, elaborate deceptions designed to break his will and absorb his consciousness into the collective. The horror reached its peak as the hotel's structure began to collapse in on itself, not through physical destruction, but through temporal dissolution. Walls became transparent, showing not just different time periods, but different possible realities where the hotel had never existed at all. Dr. Hartwell could see the Ozark Mountains as they were meant to be, peaceful, untouched by supernatural influence, home to nothing more sinister than ordinary wildlife and the natural beauty of the American wilderness. In that moment of clarity, Dr. Hartwell understood that the well's greatest power was not its ability to trap souls, but its capacity to make them forget what freedom felt like. The trapped consciousnesses had become so accustomed to their existence in the temporal loops that they genuinely believed their condition was preferable to the uncertainty and isolation of individual existence. The well had created a prison of the mind, so complete that its inmates did not even recognize themselves as prisoners. The seventh and final day at the Holloway Hotel brought with it a resolution that was both terrifying and illuminating. Dr. Hartwell's moment of clarity, when he recognized the supernatural phenomena for what they were, created a crack in the well's temporal defenses. This single act of resistance, this refusal to accept the false realities presented to him, began to unravel the complex web of temporal manipulation that had bound the hotel and its victims for decades. As Dr. Hartwell focused on his true identity and purpose, the false memories and alternate timelines began to fade. He could feel Miss Chen's consciousness, still partially connected to his own through their shared experience, beginning to remember her original self as well. The two of them, united in their determination to reclaim their individual identities, became a focal point of resistance against the well's influence. Their combined will began to create a barrier against the temporal manipulation, protecting them from further absorption into the collective consciousness. The hotel's structure, which had been phasing in and out of reality, began to stabilize around them as the temporal loops started to collapse. The various incarnations of the Whitmores, Sarah and Thomas, began to fade as the well could no longer maintain their existence across multiple time periods. James Holloway's amorphous entity in the basement chambers let out a sound like the wailing of the wind, a cry of rage and desperation as his carefully constructed temporal prison began to crumble. Dr. Hartwell realized that the well's power had always been dependent on the willing participation of its victims. The trapped souls had, in their despair and confusion, gradually accepted their fate and even begun to serve the well's purposes. But once someone truly rejected the well's influence and remembered what freedom felt like, it created a chain reaction that could potentially free all the trapped consciousnesses. The well was not just a prison, it was a system that required the cooperation of its inmates to function. As dawn broke on the seventh day, Dr. Hartwell and Miss Chen found themselves standing at the edge of the well, looking down into its depths. The dark water that had reflected so many temporal images now showed only their own faces, clear and distinct. The supernatural glow that had emanated from the well during the night was gone, replaced by the ordinary reflection of the morning sky. The hotel around them felt solid and real again, existing in a single, stable timeline. Other accounts from that morning are less cinematic and more human. A few guests wandered out bewildered. A clerk could not explain the time. A kettle boiled dry. The building felt ordinary again. Hartwell and Miss Chen left before curiosity or pride could pull them back inside. Official actions were modest and opaque. The county marked the site unsafe and discouraged camping, A surveyor's map later showed a blank where the hotel had been labeled. In local talk, dreams near the old road persisted for a season and then faded. The farther record grew inconsistent, as such records do. Some ledgers list a hotel that closed for want of business, others a property never developed. The archive, in short, refuses to tell one clean story. What remains useful is the caution we can state plainly. Environments that reward isolation by terrain, by economy, by reputation, breed arrangements that ordinary oversight does not easily reach. When testimony diverges and paper thins, the ethical task is to name what is knowable, mark what is not, and resist filling the silence with spectacle. Hartwell and Miss Chen did what careful witnesses can do. They left, they wrote, and they refused to sell their memories to the highest bidder. If careful, source-grounded work that avoids gore and substitutes process for prophecy is worth your time. You know how to help. Like and subscribe so we can keep doing it. And if you pass that road in the Ozarks, let curiosity sharpen your attention, not your appetite for marvels.